The center of the Incarnation is the cross. Self-surrender, 1961. I am going to read to you a passage from the second chapter of Galatians, verses 20 and 21. I have been crucified with Christ. The life I now live is not my life, but the life which Christ lives in me. And my present bodily life is lived by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and sacrificed himself for me. I will not nullify the grace of God. Recently, a publisher of scientific medical books said in the Open Heart something like this: I don't know what to do with myself. I alternate between two views of myself. One, that the self is to be cultivated, and the other, that the self is a cancer. And I don't know whether to look on myself as something to be cultivated or myself as a cancer that ought to be cut out. This man is a highly intelligent man and was ultimately converted. While he is highly intelligent and deeply changed, he didn't know what to do with the business of the self. He alternated between believing that the self is something that ought to be cultivated or something to be cut out. Now, obviously, if he's that confused, then a great many of us are confused as to what attitude we should take toward ourselves. The most important thing that we have is ourselves. The only thing we have, really, the only thing we will take out with us into the next life. We won't take our houses, our lands, our bank accounts, our cars, but we will take one thing out, ourselves. It is the only thing we will take out, for it's the only thing we've got. Many people are confused as to what attitude they should take towards this, the most precious thing they've got. However, some people don't like the possession that they have. They don't like the self. One brilliant man said, I wouldn't want to live with myself forever. Evidently, the self that he lived with was not a nice self. One man said, everywhere I go too, and I spoil everything. What is to be done with this self? Now, in the verses read above, Paul says, I do not nullify the grace of God. Grace planned things out, a glorious future for him, as only grace could do. And then we come along and cancel it out and nullify it. No, I don't want that. I want something else. The biggest place of nullification is at the place of the unsurrendered self. That nullifies the grace of God more than anything I know, because it moves in and says, I'm God. I don't take the grace of God. I'm God, and I'm the sinner. This self gathers attention, gathers loyalty, and gathers everything in itself and tries to make itself God. That's the supreme nullification of the grace of God. Now, Sister Mary talked this afternoon about the sacrifice and mentioned that you only sing as you sacrifice. And then she mentioned giving up this and this and this and this, and almost all were some precious, prized possessions. She cleared the way for me to talk about the supreme letting go of the center, the self. Now, the differing theories of the self speak about what should be done to the self, and they come up with different answers. On the whole, India is personality weary and world weary. They are tired of this weary round of coming back, birth after birth after birth after birth, rebirth. And so they want to get out of the world and get out of the burden of the self. We learned that Buddha sat around the Bodhi tree and pondered long and deep on the problems of suffering and pain, and came to the conclusion that existence and suffering are one. As long as you are in existence, you are in suffering. You will be in existence as long as you are in action, for it is action that makes the wheel of existence turn round. The wheel of existence is one of rebirth. The only way to get rid of action is to get rid of desire, for it is desire that brings forth action. If you cut the root of desire, even for life, and become a desireless person, then action will stop, which will stop the wheel of existence turning round, which will allow you to go into that actionless, passionless state called nirvana. Nirvana is literally the state of snuffed-out candle. If it isn't the end of being, it is certainly the end of becoming. I asked the Buddhist monk in Ceylon, is there any existence in nirvana? And he said, there is no suffering. How can there be any existence? So Buddha would get rid of the problems of life by getting rid of life. He would get rid of our headaches by getting rid of our heads. Buddhism is weary of this thing called personality and proposed to snuff it out like a snuffed candle. Hinduism does much the same. It says that we should merge our personality into the impersonal. So the practicing Hindu sits with his attention concentrated upon the point of his nose, dreaming himself out into that actionless, passionless essence called nirvana. Just as a drop of water is lost in the ocean, so the separate individual personalities are lost in the sea of existence. You are gone. The impersonal is all, and in the bhakti cults, bhakti means devotion, they try to merge themselves into the image of the divine, the one whom they obey. A man came to one of our ashrams in Satal. I said, "Where did you come from?" He said, "Ram, Ram." Ram is one of the names of their gods. I said, "Where are you going to?" He said, "Ram, Ram." I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Ram, Ram." I said, "What is your name?" He said, "Ram, Ram." His answer to everything that I asked him was Ram, Ram. He had merged himself into the object of his devotion. He apparently didn't want to be himself any longer. Now you come to the modern day and you find the reverse of that, the reverse of not wanting to know yourself. Psychiatry, modern psychiatry, says 3 things. First, know yourself. Second, accept yourself. And third, express yourself. What's missing there? Something that is vital and very important from the Christian standpoint is missing. First, know yourself. Psychiatry thought that if you just know yourself, then you could cure yourself of all your ills. If you could have insight into yourself, then that insight would cure you. Now, cure might be by insight has just about had its day. It's made its contribution. It helps you marginally here and there. However, our psychiatric institutions are filled with people who have insight into what's the matter with them, but they are still hospitalized. Why? The question is deeper, and insight doesn't necessarily cure you. Second, accept yourself. A psychiatrist says you just need to accept yourself. However, how can you accept an unacceptable self? A self full of conflicts, full of everything that is wrong. And you are asked to accept yourself. How can you? You cannot accept the unacceptable. And third, express yourself. Now, if you get a dozen people in one place, all of whom want to express themselves, then you have the stage set for clash and confusion and jealousy and anger and strife. For instance, we have in our churches classes for training members in leadership skills. We say to our young people, go out and become leaders. You get a dozen people together, all of whom want to be leaders, then what? I said that in a meeting one day, and a Baptist minister spoke up after I said, "What have you got?" He said, "You've got a Baptist church." He might have said it about any other denomination. When you are in the mission field, you have young people who have been trained to be leaders, and you put them in one mission station, say a dozen of them. They act as leaders and imply, "I'm a leader, fall in behind me." You have self-assertion, and these leaders express themselves. These are not leaders, but rather fussy managers of other people. These are not leaders. I look to see what is missing here. The missing thing is what Christians would introduce. Their emphasis is a terribly radical concept that cuts across many of our modern emphasis. The Christian would say, yes, know yourself, but he would add, surrender yourself. Then you can accept yourself, and then you can express yourself. Why? Because as Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. The Christian then has the most radical attitude toward the self. It says to surrender the self, not to cultivate it. If you try to cultivate an unsurrendered self, then you have to sit on the lid all the time. That unsurrendered self just won't be cultivated, and then it begins to explode. However, if you change the center and surrender yourself to Christ and focus on that new center, then around that new center you can cultivate the surrendered self. But only when Christ has got it, that self, and it is no longer trying to be a God, but is surrendered to God. Now, the last thing in the world that we ever give up is ourselves. We give up here, 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 and here. Many a man who goes into the ministry gives up everything to be a minister except the minister. Many a missionary goes out across the seas and gives up everything to be a missionary, everything except the missionary. The self is still there, watchful of its position, place, and power. I was talking to a missionary about to be sent home from the Congo. I said to her, "As you look at yourself, what do you think is your trouble?" She said, "I am sitting on a lid." I said, "What's under the lid?" She said, "Two people, one who doesn't want to be a missionary and the other who is afraid that if she isn't the missionary, she will be lost." I said, "You don't want to be either one of those people, do you? You see, neither one had surrendered itself." Peter said, "Lord, we have left everything to follow thee. What do we get?" The fact that he asked, "What do we get?" showed he hadn't left everything. He had left his fishing boats, father, mother, brothers and sisters, occupation, everything except the self. What do we get? Jesus, "If any man would come after me, let him leave father, mother, brothers, sisters, house, and lands, yea, and his own self also." Why did he put that last? Yea, and his own self also, because that is the last thing we ever give up. Houses and lands and occupations, mother, father, brother, sister, everything goes. But the unsurrendered self is the last thing we ever give up, and we are constantly tripping over that unsurrendered self. A man was converted in one of our meetings. He was a cancer research doctor, and he was tremendously excited over this business of being a Christian. He had given himself to Christ. He said, "You know, I am going into the biggest mission field in the world," he said. "I am going to go back to try to convert the greatest pagans of the world." I said, "Who are they?" He said, "Cancer cells, for cancer cells are cells turned selfish. They won't contribute. They demand that everybody contribute to them. Rather than give themselves for the sake of the rest, they demand that the rest give themselves for the sake of the cancer. So that cancer cells are cells turned selfish, and they eat their way through to their own death and the death of the organism that they feed on." He said, "I am going back to convert them if I can." A self that is centered on itself is a cancerous self. It demands that the rest serve them. It is selfish, and the only thing to be done is to surrender that self. Christianity points an arrow straight at the heart of our problem, the unsurrendered self, and it says, "Let go of the one thing you've got." But then you say anxiously, "My self is gone. The one thing that I own is gone." You may believe that you are afraid to do this and will be bereft of everything. It does look as though you will be bereft. You might think that I haven't a thing now, that I have emptied my hands of the one thing I own, myself. I have laid it at the feet of another. Am I canceled out? It would seem so for a moment, for you come to your knees and you die. You literally die. Paul said, "I'm crucified with Christ." Note there that he said with Christ. If you're not crucified with Christ voluntarily and with set purpose, then you will be crucified on the cross of your own contradictions and your own conflicts. It isn't the question of if you would rather be crucified or not. You will be crucified. The question is if you will be crucified with Christ. You will have purpose in it, meaning in it, goal in it, resurrection in it, and the future in it. Or would you rather be crucified like the impenitent thief upon the cross, a crucifixion that has no meaning except deeper and deeper darkness? So we are all hanging on a cross, some with Christ, some on the cross of their own conflicts and their own inherent unhappiness. So don't think that you will escape the cross. But here is a cross. Which one will you take? And which, when you take it, has life in it? I am crucified with Christ. And the old version says, "Nevertheless I live." Is the self canceled out? Oh, no, no, no. When we surrender it to Him, He cleanses it of 1,000 contradictions and hands our life back to us. Nevertheless I live. Now I live. To my fingertips, to the roots of my hair, I live. You lose your life, you find it again, and now you can accept yourself because that self is under redemption. It is an acceptable self. It is not perfect, but it is as good as a self, for it is being redeemed. It is in the process of redemption. God has got a hold of your life. The account says, He taketh hold of the seed of Abraham, the children of Abraham. He takes hold, and they are under the process of redemption. Now, that is an acceptable self. And now I can accept that self because He accepts it. Now I can love it because He loves it. Now I can respect it because He respects it. In other words, when you obey the deepest law of the universe, you lose yourself and you find it again. It is a paradox. I can't explain it, but when you lose your life and find it, you are never so much your own as when you are most His. Belonging to Him, you belong to yourself. I don't argue this point. I only testify that His bondage is freedom. His imprisonment makes you walk the earth a conqueror. Bound to Him, you walk the earth afraid of nothing. You are His and His forever. Now you can accept that self. Christianity teaches self-love and teaches that the self is not to be canceled. There is a lovely song that we sing. It's a beautiful song, but completely untrue. The last line of the verse says, all of self and none of thee. The next verse to the last line says, some self and some of thee. And the last line says, none of self and all of thee. That none of self is just wrong. You can't get rid of yourself. You put yourself out of the door and it will come back in the window, probably dressed up in religious garments. It is the same old self. They taught a dog to play dead, and it was an amazing performance. They'd say, Rover, you are dead. Rover would fall on the floor and stick out his legs stiff, open his jaw, eyes rolling, rolled up, practically stiff. Rover was the perfect picture of a dead dog, except at the end of his tail, it was wagging, meaning, am I not playing the part very well? Am I not a wonderful dead dog? Well, in people who say they have no self, that tail begins to wag. You can see the self, it sticks out. No, you've got a self and you can't get rid of it. It is a part of you. It is you, and by no means can you get rid of it. However, when you give yourself to Jesus in full surrender, you can now love yourself because you love something more than yourself. You love Jesus more than yourself. Therefore, you can love yourself in Him. Out of Him, you cannot love yourself. You are not a lovable self. Out of Him, you can't respect yourself. You don't like yourself. Out of Him, you cannot accept yourself because yourself is not acceptable. But in Him, you can accept yourself. You can love yourself. You can rather like yourself. You find that you are rather decent self because it is under redemption. It was this today, and you will get better all the time. You were this today. You were better tomorrow. Better the second day, and better the third day. You are on the way, up, up, up. You are under the upward call of God in Christ. You can now accept that self and rather love it. You can say, I don't care where it comes from. I only care where it is going. And Christianity teaches self-love. You shall love thy neighbor as thyself. Not more, not less, but as yourself. For if you don't love yourself, then you probably can't love your neighbor or anybody else. However, now you can get along with yourself, and you live with yourself, and other people can live with you. Rufus Mosley used to say, and he had a wonderful self, I like to talk to myself because I like to listen to an intelligent person talk. And if you had a self like his, you would like to talk to it. I don't blame some people for not talking to themselves. You can accept yourself realistically. One woman said, I ain't what I want to be and I ain't what I expect to be, but I certainly ain't what I was. I'm on the way up. So you can love yourself. And all that hypocrisy about not having a self is not true. I do have a self, but I do know my limitations and I know who has got me. And if I step out of Him, I know what will happen to me. One woman said, if it were not for the Holy Spirit, Stanley Jones would be a mess. She was profoundly right. Every one of us is a mess outside of Jesus, and inside of Jesus, every one of us is a message. You then have a destiny, meaning goal. You will be on the way, and then you can express yourself. You say, yes, I am expressing myself because it is a self that He has got, for I am expressing Him in my expressions. Listen to what this verse says. The life I now live is not my life, but the life which Christ lives in me. I am still there, and he is living his life in me and through me, and we are on a cooperative plan. I supply willingness, and he supplies power, and we get along wonderfully together. There is no hypocrisy. The self is still there. It is still there, but as long as Jesus has that helm and he's Lord and the self is subservient, it is wonderful. I was up in Alaska writing on a book between meetings, and I had to write before a mirror because there was no other place to write. I don't usually write my books in front of a mirror, but I stopped my writing and looked into the looking glass, and I saw myself and said, "Stanley Jones, you are a very happy man, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am very happy." And I said, "How did you get this way?" I said, "I don't know. I walked across a field one day and I stubbed my toe and said, 'What is this treasure?' I ran off and sold everything I had and bought that field. I have been hugging myself ever since. All that self-loathing and self-rejection and self-hate drops away. It is as bad to hate yourself as to hate somebody else. Self-hate is sin, just as other hate is sin. Putting yourself in his hands is no longer hating yourself, for he accepts you, and you accept yourself. He forgives you, and you forgive yourself. He respects you, and you respect yourself. You have no illusions of grandeur. You say, "Yes, I can do things, but through his grace. I can accomplish things, but only inside of him. I step out of him, and I am impotent and powerless. The life I now live is not my life, for I am never so alive as when I am fully his, for the life which Christ lives in me." A college president said to me some time ago, "Do you remember writing a letter 20 years ago to a young minister who said his father had disgraced the family name and he felt terribly inferior?" Strangely enough, I did, even after 20 years. I remembered what I wrote to him. I wrote, "Do you remember the genealogy of Jesus? The genealogy of Jesus includes Solomon, who was born of David by Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. Did that fact break Jesus because he had that disgrace back there? No, because Jesus was more conscious of this other heredity, which came from the Father." I told this college president, "You have a new heredity from God your Father. You have a blood transfusion from the Son of God. It has been given to you now, and you now have the heredity which cancels your earthbound heredity. You are not inferior. If you're a child of God, you needn't despise yourself if you are a child of God." He said, "You know, when I got that letter, it did something for me." And I said, "I am a child of God and not inferior. I am in his grace." He said, "You see what has happened? I am the president of this college now, and when you wrote that letter, I had a sense of inferiority. I was beaten by my bad heredity because my father disgraced our family name. Christ lives in me, and if Christ lives in me, I am respectable. Why would you believe that you are inferior if you are a child of God? Put your shoulders back and march on unafraid. Realize that your present bodily life is lived by faith in the Son of God, because this is not the Word became Word. It is the Word became flesh. Then you don't despise your body any longer. Do you remember what St. Francis used to call his body? Brother Ass. When he was about to die, he turned to his body and said, "Brother Ass, I haven't treated you very well, have I? I have been hard on you." We need to accept our body and talk to it nicely. It is amazing what the body will do if you talk to it nicely. It will do wonderful things for you. When I was in Cairo and about to climb the pyramids, there was a pastor, a very eloquent man, who would only think about his own health and had his finger on his pulse all the time to see if something was the matter with him, and there always was. I said to him one day, "I am going over to climb the pyramids." He looked at me and said, "Can your heart and your arteries stand it?" I said, "I have not asked them, and I don't intend to." I knew what my heart and my arteries would say. "Oh, go ahead, Stanley, we'll stand with you. Sometimes you are a fool, but you're a blessed fool. Go on." Who loved me? Who loved me? And if he loved me, I can love myself too. I can love myself for loving him. I can say, "You are a sensible man. You have put your faith in the central place in the Son of God. You are wise in what you chose the highest. You have done the only sensible thing that has ever done when you laid yourself at his feet and said, 'Here I am. Take me as I am and make me over.' He gave himself for me and sacrificed himself for me. The cross puts value in me. If I were the only person in the world, would Jesus come to die for me? Knowing him as I do, I think he would say, yes, he's worth it. I love him and I will give myself for him. Doesn't that put dignity into yourself? Of course it does, for you are a child of the Heavenly Father and you are on the way to be made into his likeness from one degree of glory to another. Now have we surrendered ourselves? Has the self gone up into the sacred flame and died as God? To live now as the Son of God, no longer itself but belonging to him? Have you surrendered that one thing? In the Midwest, a pastor told me this story. He said, I was very bitter and resentful against the bishop and the superintendent. I felt that they weren't giving me appointments big enough for me, and I was bitter and resentful. So one day I said to one of my parishioners, the bishop and the cabinet are crucifying me. I am hanging on the cross. And the parishioner, a very wise person, said, yes, Pastor, you are hanging on the cross, but you have never died. You are still wriggling with resentment. He, the pastor, said, that is exactly what I needed. And I went off to my knees and I died. I died to the little man that I was, resentful, bitter, jealous, and envious. Out of the ashes of that hour came a new man, God's man, wanting nothing, afraid of nothing. He continued, 285 people were converted in my church that year, a church which I thought was too small for me. I was really too small for it. And he said, there hasn't been a Sunday since then that somebody hasn't come to God. He died and was born again. I hope that there will be a lot of graves on this hillside where a man can point and say, this is where I died. And I put a no resurrection sign over it. There is no resurrection for that self. It has died. A man came up to me one day and said, do you know me? I have more difficulty with the truth at that place more than any other place that I know. I meet a lot of people in my time, and I hate to say that I don't know you. The nearest to truth I could come was this. Well, I do and I don't. It was something about him that I knew, but I didn't really know him. He said, I am the man that came to see you in the hotel in Oklahoma. I said, you are not that man. He said, yes, I am. I said, but you are different. He said, of course I am different. I remember how he came into the room in that hotel and without any preliminaries threw himself down in the chair and said, I'm trying to live a Christian life, but I'm having a terrible time of it. I said, what's the matter? But he said, I don't know, but I say to myself, I'll give up this and I'll give up that and I'll compromise here and there, but please let me stay at the center. Well, I said, my brother, that is very simple then, isn't it? That's why you're having a terrible time of it. You're good, but you're not God. God's God. And things don't add up when you're God. You have to surrender yourself to God and make him God. You've got to lose your life and it'll come back to you again. Will you do it? He said, is that what I've got to do? I said, yes, you've got to get yourself out of your own hands and into the hands of God. We knelt and prayed. And he simply said, God, please take me over. And oh God, make me over just as I am. And he turned that self-centered, festering self over to God and said, take me as I am. And he did. He shook my hand and went away. I didn't see him again until this occasion. And on that occasion, his wife came to me and she said, thank you for giving my husband back to me. I said, I didn't give him back to you. He gave himself to God, and then God gave him back to himself, and then to you, and to everybody else. A woman said to me, it is very comfortable to get yourself off your own hands. It is comfortable because that is where we belong, in his hands. He is the creator and the recreator of that recalcitrant self and the redeemer. But he does not cancel it. He cleanses it and then hands it back to us again. Now, just as my fingers are rooted in the palm of my hands, all the sins that we deal with are rooted in the unsurrendered self. Why do we lie? Because the self thinks it will get the advantage. Why are we envious and jealous? Because the self doesn't want anybody to get ahead of it. Why are we bad-tempered? Because of the unsurrendered self. Why are we impure? Because the self thinks it will get some enjoyment. Why are we gloomy? Because the self is pouting. These things are the fruit. The unsurrendered self is the root. These are the symptoms. The unsurrendered self is the disease. Don't deal with the symptoms. Go to the root. Go to the unsurrendered self and say, you've got me, and I am surrendering now. Jesus said, you can't spoil a man's goods unless you bind the strong man. Then you can spoil his goods. Who is that strong man? It is the unsurrendered self here. Then you can spoil his goods. The root of our difficulties is the unsurrendered self. A man wrote me the other day saying, "You wrote about my daughter in one of your books. I want to tell you that she died a few weeks ago, a lovely, lovely girl, and we are grateful for what you said about her. She was in one of our first ashrams in the Blue Ridge, and she went out on a mountainside over a rustic bridge under which a stream was flowing, a mountain stream. There she made her decision for Christ. She picked up a chip of wood and threw it into the stream, and she said, 'There goes my pride,' and watched it float away. She picked up another chip and threw it in, and she said, 'There goes my fear,' and watched it float away. She picked a third and said, 'There goes my resentment,' and watched it float away. Then she picked up the real one. She knew this was it, and she threw it in, and she said, 'There goes myself,' and watched it float away. That girl came back to the ashram on wings. 'Oh,' she said, 'it has gone.' But had it gone? It came back again, radiant, beautiful, effective, lovable, and creative. That self wasn't canceled, it was cleansed. It was now consecrated and fruitful, for it was now wholly his and in Christ's hands. Now I believe we would like to close this meeting on our knees, wouldn't we? I believe we would. I was going to get us some blankets for us to kneel on, but why should we have blankets? Boards are befitting, aren't they? Hard boards, very befitting. Shouldn't we kneel right on hard boards and surrender ourselves to Jesus? There were no cushions at the cross. There were nails. We are going to close this meeting. I don't know what you feel, and you may ask, is this done once and for all, or do you have to do it daily? It is both. You give yourself once and for all, but there are little alls that you have to surrender daily. I believe I gave him my all, but I find a lot of little alls I have got to let him have. Whether it is once and for all, the big all that you have to surrender, or for these little alls, I don't know, but I think you would like to end this meeting on your knees, wouldn't you? Would you like to come then? Those who want to surrender themselves, would you come and meet me here at this place of prayer, and we will have a prayer together and close the meeting on our knees? Will you come?